back after our closed session, and we will move next to the presentation from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and we're joined by the Executive Director and the Board Secretary. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the Council. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Chuck Dean, and I'm the Executive Director of the Council of Governments, and I've been in that position for 1 year and about 3 weeks. It's great to be here today, and great to be greeting Mr. Kenner, who has been, I think, aboard about 6 months, and I've enjoyed his participation with our CAOs committee. Most recently, we had a retreat with the CEOs, the deputy CEOs, and the assistant CEOs in Virginia. Council of Governments, if I could, just provide a few-minute overview and a few minutes of updates, and be happy to answer any and all questions that you might have. We're proud to represent and add value to over 22 local governments, including Tacoma Park, and we're an independent nonprofit association. The Council of Governments is comprised of over 300 state, federal, and locally elected officials in our region of over 5 million people. The Council of Governments is also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, for the region. COG staffs the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, or TPB, one of over 300 MPOs in the country. I believe Mr. Grimes represents Tacoma Park on the TPB. The TPB is charged with reviewing plans and programs that seek federal transportation funding. In addition to coordinating transportation across a multi-jurisdictional region, TPB is the hub for expert analysis and regional plans and strategies. We now have 134 professional staff members across many disciplines in transportation, environmental programs, economic development, land use, and homeland security. We have a budget of about $26 million. We're held together by a regional vision called Region Forward, and Region Forward promotes a more accessible, sustainable, prosperous, and livable region. This vision is shared and supported by all of our 22 member jurisdictions and was adopted as a compact in 2010. Region Forward revolves around integrating 9 goal areas, land use, transportation, environment, and others, and making sure that we're finding connections and synergy between these plans. Coming to the COG board 2 days from now will be a focus on land use and activity centers, 141 activity centers in the region. Coming to the TPB in 9 days will be our Regional Transportation Priorities Plan. A major focus of our work in the last year is making sure that these 2 plans, one coming up to the COG board and the other coming up to the TPB, are integrated as land use and transportation are. Moving from COG, a little more focus on Tacoma Park, if I could. I'd like to share with you our perspective on some of the return on investment for Tacoma Park's membership in the Council of Governments. I think I'd first start with transportation. And TPB approval is necessary to obtain federal funding for transportation projects. And the TPB has approved over $14.9 million in federal, state, and local matching funding for Tacoma Park. In addition to this funding, that's part of our Constrained Long-Range Plan or Transportation Improvement Program. We also provide additional benefits through technical assistance grants and regional peer exchange networks, such as the Transportation Alternative Program and the TLC, the Transportation Land Use Connection Program. Moving from transportation then to the environmental area, Tacoma Park is a very active participant in COG's regional environmental policy and technical committees. And these committees oversee quality and cost efficiency for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, for solid waste, recycling, air quality, and energy management regionally. MWEC, the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, and CBC, Chesapeake Bay Policy Committee, have ensured cleaner air for the region, and I'm happy to announce that we got through an entire year without any code red days. We also provide technical support from the EPA to COG's own regional tree canopy experts, and I know Tacoma Park staff are particularly involved in that. The community engagement campaign secured $88,000 in direct outreach for Tacoma Park. Also, the environmental program, Tap It, COG's Pro Tap Water program, which promotes local restaurants by encouraging them to refill water bottles at no cost to users. That includes, also related are the Do Not Flush campaign, which discourages harmful materials down drains and toilets, and drought messaging through a landscaping guide and other water sustainability outreach materials. And another initiative, the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Program, has directly provided $1.2 million to fund 18 projects to clean and restore the most critical waterway in Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park's COG membership helps ensure regional stability in times of crisis and emergencies. One example of this is RICS, the COG's Regional Incident Communications Coordination System, ability to send out emergency text alerts, notifications, and updates. COG in general and the RICS system in particular supports all 22 member jurisdictions by coordinating regional alerts with police departments, fire departments, and emergency managers. This system delivers over 1,700 messages per year. I've had a little too many of these 3 a.m. snow calls recently, but we also sponsor the emergency calls, snow calls. In FY12 and 2013, we hosted 41 calls with the Office of Personnel Management and the National Weather Service during such events as the derecho, Superstorm Sandy, and winter weather events. And as I said, these for me have become the dreaded 3 a.m. snow calls. On each of these calls, depending on the severity of the event, between 50 to 200 regional officials participate in these calls to navigate the severity of each event's impact on their citizens, provide some advice, technical expertise as OPM, for example, considers its decision for the federal government. Community planning and services, this is includes our land use work. COG staff briefed the mayor and council at your September 3rd, 2012 meeting on activity centers. And on January 9th, 2013, this Wednesday, last year, January 9th, 2013, the COG board approved a new map of activity centers, which included Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park, our staff would categorize as a close-in and urbanizing activity center, as found in our activity centers map, and is part of the connected core of the Greater Washington region. On Wednesday, a document will go before the board that looks to take this to the next level. And this document is called Place Plus Opportunity. And this document will integrate the map and provide in-depth analysis on access and activity centers will be presented for adoption at the board. The report provides analysis and implementation strategies for development efforts and community building for the activity centers throughout the region. And I think I'd wrap up with some of the cost savings. COG membership allows jurisdictions to save money and participate in region-wide volume buying. Tacoma Park currently participates in the COG fuel purchasing contract, providing savings only available to COG members. And I'd love to break down the math on this one if you don't mind. But the COG price of gas per gallon is 83 cents cheaper than the current average price at the pump. Tacoma Park uses an average of 48,000 gallons of gas a year, according to statistics from your staff. So 48,000 times 83 cents is an annual savings of 39,000. Tacoma Park leverages the COG rider clause, which enables the city to obtain the lowest price with established vendors and simultaneously reduce administrative overhead, and does this COG rider clause about 10 to 20 times a year. The National Purchasing Institute estimates that writing the clauses of other agencies yields administrative cost savings between 3% and 6% of the total value of the contract. So if I would use a scenario of the minimum that we think per year that the COG, that Tacoma Park uses in writing other contracts is about 10, And the average of these contracts is about $100,000, and that would yield about $1 million pool. Using the low end of that cost savings, that'd be about an average saving about $30,000 to the city. If we take the higher end, that is in a given year, about 20 contracts were written from other agencies, and these average again at $100,000, yielding a pool of $2 million, and multiply that towards the 6% savings. That would be an average savings of $120,000. So the COG rider in itself might even outstrip the numbers that I talked about in the savings for the fuel program. So beyond the cost savings, there are a number of ways to get involved. A number of you are involved with TBB or MWAC or CPC or other committees, and be happy to talk with you about those more in detail, either this evening or at some other time. And look forward to seeing you at 777 North Capitol Street, or seeing you here at the City Council chambers sometime in the future. I want to thank you for having me, and before questions that you might have, I also want to introduce Monica, and Monica is our Member Services Associate and our Board Clerk. And Monica, if you wouldn't mind saying hello, just sharing a little bit about your background.
Sure. I've been with the Council of Governments for about 5 months now. I previously worked for the Florida League of Cities, which is similar to the state associations in Maryland and Virginia. And my goal is to just help you guys with anything you may need regarding any of the boards or policy committees. You can always give me a call if you have any questions about the Council of Governments or need any help with any of the work you have going on related to any of our committees. Thank you.
Monica. And just to show the extent of her dedication, Monica got her graduate degree from FSU, and if you're a football fan at all, you know that the BCS game tonight is happening in just a few minutes, so she'd rather be spending her time with you rather than with other alums. So, Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for having us tonight, and if there's a question or something else that I can help with, happy to do my best to respond.
Thank you for coming out here and sharing a little bit of what COG does and the ways in which our membership benefits us. I think, I don't remember what our dues are, but I think the benefits that we get outweigh the annual dues, and so I think it's very beneficial for us to be members, and it's also very beneficial for us to swim in the large pool as relatively small fish, and have influence on many things that go on in the region as a benefit of being members of COG. I know we're one of the original members of COG, and because of that we're grandfathered in, even though our size is smaller than the current minimum size for membership. So we continue to be one of the small fish in the big pond.
Well, because of Tacoma Park's membership in the Council of Governments, generally it has an outsized influence, and because of your long history as a Council of Governments board member, you have great influence. It was just this year that Mayor Williams has been the longest serving locally elected official on the Council of Governments. And there was another gentleman who has been on the Council of Governments board longer, but he's a state representative. Mr. Scott just retired, so congratulations, Mr. Mayor. You are now officially the longest serving Council of Governments board member without question and without asterisk.
Do my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Bean or Ms. Beyruti? Could you just back up for a second to, it was about the second or third slide, it was the transportation dollars. And I think it was very gratifying that under the Transportation Alternative Program that we were able to get just this year those two projects and the funding toward that. It was an example of having projects ready and submitting them, and because there were so few applications that were ready to take advantage of that, we managed to scarf up a good bit of money, and that was very pleasing.
There were two applications, and they were both ours.
Yeah. So.
Yes, as you both know, to be in the right place at the right time, but also to be aligned with the strategy of Montgomery County or Prince George's County or the state or the federal at the right time is the key for these things.
It's one of the more enjoyable votes I've ever taken in the Transportation Planning Board.
That's I don't know if that's saying a lot or a little, but take it for a very, very positive thing.
And it's also very helpful, I think, that in the more recent past, COG has been doing a lot of work on aligning the COG goals with other local governments' goals in terms of actions that the states take, and developing a legislative agenda and coordinating that so that it's not just the local governments who are trying to have a voice either alone or in concert with other counties or municipalities, but as a regional voice on any number of issues. And I look forward to continuing to make that a stronger area in which COG operates.
Thank you, sir. And I look forward to seeing you in Annapolis on Wednesday evening and for introducing me to some of the key people that I'll need to advance COG's agenda in this regard, which includes transportation funding and energy efficiency and productivity and water quality. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you being here. We will now move to the next section of the agenda. We have no additional agenda items this evening. One or two things I just want to point out on upcoming agendas. We're now basically back into our regular meeting schedule. We've been a little light on meetings since, I guess, late October, but we're now back with basically every week. Nothing particular to call out for next week's meeting, but the following week, Monday, January 20th, city offices will be closed in honor of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and so the council meeting will be on Tuesday, January 21st. And there are a couple of things that people might want to take note of on that agenda. We'll have a presentation from the Nuclear Free Committee and their recommendations on some things. And we'll have work session discussion on proposed ethics ordinance amendments and also on the council grant programs. That'll be an opportunity to revisit how we look at grant opportunities and how we structure that. And a reminder that week on Thursday, January 23rd, we've scheduled part 2 of the council retreat, and that will be a budget retreat. And do we have a location for that yet? Okay. So we'll be able to announce where that is next week.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
I didn't hear you mention it. Were we going to have an upcoming agenda item on deer hunting?
That's one of the things on my list. I will be having my agenda meeting tomorrow, and we'll be wrestling some things into the agenda.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
At this point, we'll go to public comment, and that's on anything that's not on our agenda this evening. Also, anything that is on our agenda that's a work session item. So this is your opportunity to comment. And if people would identify themselves, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes, and please use the podium.
My name is Bob Sheldon. I live at 319 Boyd Avenue. I was before you at the November 25th meeting to discuss the bike share racks, and applauding Seth Grimes for going out and Brian for going out and looking at alternative locations for the bike share racks. Since that time, actually in the past couple days, I have received a petition. I wrote a petition up and got 17 business owners and Historic Tacoma to sign off on this petition. And so I'll read the petition and the businesses that have signed on to this. We, the undersigned businesses in Tacoma Park, support bike share. However, we do not support the location at the gazebo in Old Town for many reasons. The gazebo and renovation in Old Town cost over $1 million, providing the only community art space in Old Tacoma, which is now adversely affected by the bike share racks. we support Seth Grimes' effort to relocate the bike share racks to another location in Old Town. The community would be better served by such relocation. And the people who have signed this petition are Capital City Cheesecake, Artful Framing, Roscoe's, Amano, Tacoma Bicycle, Middle Eastern Cuisine, Old Tacoma Ace Hardware, House of Musical Tradition, Republic, Now and Then, Covered Market, Polly Sue's, Supergirl, S&S Liquor, Cedar Crossing Tavern, Mark's Kitchen, the Tacoma Green Commuter, and Historic Tacoma. This includes the two bicycle stores that are located in Tacoma Park, Tacoma Bicycle and Green Commuter. And also the Old Tacoma Business Association also has unanimously voted to support this proposal that the bike share racks be relocated. I won't take up any more of your time, but I strongly encourage you to listen to the businesses in Tacoma Park, and particularly listen to the businesses before you make decisions on locations of items that are going to affect the Old Tacoma. And these are the people who have to live with the bike share racks in their current location. They're the ones asking, they support the bike share racks, but they encourage you to move those bike share racks to another location. And Seth has been looking into those. I can come up with several ideas as to where else those racks could be located. But I encourage you to look at those locations. But here is my petition. I will give it to Brian, and we'll go from there.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Patty Baker with the Old Tacoma Business Association, and I'm here to read a letter from the Old Tacoma Business Association. The Board of Directors of the Old Tacoma Business Association unanimously supports the City of Tacoma Park's proposed solicitation for proposals for the development of the city-owned lot in the Tacoma Junction neighborhood of Old Tacoma. As stewards of the Old Tacoma Business District, it is our belief that this is an underutilized commercial area that will greatly benefit from a thoughtfully designed development plan. Development that introduces increased economic activity will enhance the viability of the neighborhood and its existing businesses. Commercial development at the Tacoma Junction will better connect the area with the rest of Old Tacoma Business District and strengthen the business community as a whole. We look forward to reviewing the plans when they are available. Welcome continued participation in the process.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and council members. Thanks for letting us be here. My name is Jo Egelhoff, and I live at 7511 Carroll, not Carroll Avenue, Carroll Avenue. And my husband is also here. I almost called you a neighbor, honey. Dave, and Al Tariq Harris. And Janelle Harris is Al Tariq's wife, and Ivor Nilsson and Glenn Wallace actually have an address on Niagara Court, and they are both ill with bronchial infections, so we said, do not come. So they said we could speak on their behalf, and they originally spoke with Kay over 18 months ago concerning the paving of Niagara Court. And Niagara Court is 117 feet long. It extends off of Carroll Avenue, east off of Carroll, north of Lincoln Avenue, just a small little street. It's currently a gravel surface, and the surface is very difficult to keep neat, and the area around it to be kept neat summer and winter. Winter, it's difficult to keep the snow and ice cleared on the area. And we homeowners respectfully request that paving be considered for inclusion in your fiscal year 2015 budget. We understand it is important the road be paved with a permeable surface, and we very much appreciate the recommendations of Department of Public Works Director Braithwaite and City Engineer Ali Khalilian. I believe Director Braithwaite requested the city engineer to update the costs for several design options that he proposed 18 months ago. So I believe Mayor Williams and Council Member Kay Daniels Cohen, I believe made that request of the Public Works Department. So hopefully that information is available as the budget is continues to be worked on and finalized. So we very much appreciate your consideration of that paving. It's I think there's one other small space in the city that isn't paved. So we very much appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jim DeLuigi. I reside at 7106 13th Avenue. First of all, Happy New Year, and thank all of you, both staff and City Council and Mayor, for getting us well through 2013, keeping us solvent and well-served. Thank you very much. First issue, intersection of Sligo Creek Parkway and New Hampshire Avenue. Construction has stopped there for a significant period of time. Nothing is going on. Sligo Creek Parkway remains closed for no apparent reason. I'd like the city to get actively involved in that and request that if this stalemate in construction due to construction disputes is going to be ongoing for a while, that Sligo Creek Parkway be opened and the traffic light be reinstalled, at least until things are resolved. Secondly, city property at the junction. I've read the various proposals that are out there. I think in order to assure a vibrant commercial community, with adequate parking needs to be included in this proposal. I'm not sure it's in there at present. Maybe it's thought to be. But before issuing a request for proposals to develop the individual site, I think the city should first determine what overall needs might be incorporated, particularly for parking, and the proposed developer be so advised. Now, for example, if 20 spaces were needed to serve the surrounding community and stores, perhaps then the developer should have some option to include those, and perhaps the city could contribute some way, either in the cost of the development or in contribution in terms of the cost of the lot. But I think a key aspect there is parking, and parking to well serve that all the area around it, not just a particular site that would be developed, but also the other stores and other business activities. I'm a member of Historic Tacoma, Vice President. We have a facility there on Carroll. I can tell you for a fact that the parking lot behind us is often full in the evenings due to other activities that are in that strip. So therefore, if you're going to develop a new property, you're going to need additional parking to serve that as well. So thank you very much for your consideration, and good luck for 2014.
Thank you.
My name is Susan Robb, and I live at 203 Manners Circle, which is in the junction. And Jim was a nice introduction to what I have to say. First of all, I appreciate the council's attention to the junction and the task force recommendations and your efforts in the work session this evening. Parking is critical. I live on Manners Circle. In addition to people frequenting the businesses that do exist in the 7300 block and the co-op, we have a number of people that work in the businesses who are parking on our street. That parking can begin at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it can be there until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening. It's not always the same people. The work schedules and business operation are very flexible in that block of the Carroll Avenue. Tonight, when I got home, I had to park on the yellow curb. Saturday, I went out in the morning, came home in the middle of the afternoon, had to park a block away, and then when I returned, I went out again, came home at 6 o'clock. There were no parking spaces on my street, and then I had to park on the ice slab at the yellow curb at the corner until one of the business people left a space on my street, and that is routine. If I leave right now, I might get home before my parking space is taken again. But please, please be aware that there are business operators, there are business people already, and they are parking. Manor Circle is the preferred parking space, and we will soon be asking for permit parking on that street. It's no longer viable for us to live on the street when it's a commercial parking lot. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tiba Wasafa. I live at 7720 Carroll Avenue in Ward 5. First, Happy New Year. And tomorrow marks Ethiopian New Year, so I'll also wish you an Ethiopian New Year. I'll say it in Amharic, Melkam Ganna. I'm here today to publicly express my interest in the development of the junction. As you all know, my wife is sitting on that corner, and I, for the last 2 years, have worked tremendously hard to introduce a new international business. And we've chose Takoma Park as our home for our business for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, because of our declared common good, our sense of community. We take a great pride in being the nation's second benefit corporation. And we take a great pride in the fact that our business was conceived and developed because of the support that we have, massive support we have in our community. And what we aspire to do today, even though it looks small, is a small business, a small community business with massive potential. The global coffee industry is a $100 billion market. The specialty coffee is about $30 billion market, which is highly dominated by Starbucks. And we've found a niche, we found an opportunity, and we're trying to build the first model coffee shop in Takoma Park, which will eventually be duplicated in every other market. We're going to bring to Takoma Park massive visibility, tremendous economic development, and we're going to be more than to Takoma Park, more than Starbucks is to Seattle. The numbers in our business plan is amazing, and we're bent out of shape to make sure this business grows in Takoma Park. And anywhere out of Takoma Park would break our model. We want to show community has what it takes to conceive, to develop, and to launch an idea. And this Blessed Coffee that we started 2 years ago, my wife and I have worked every Sunday at the farmers market. We've gone to community organizations, festivals, faith-based centers, and to some of the homes. And we've invited a lot of people to our homes to share our vision, to share our idea, and to develop massive support. Today, we proudly say, in just 2 years, with little money that we raised from our friends, some of them who sit in this hall, we have $1 million brand. Now we just finished the first phase. We're moving into the second phase. Our ultimate goal is to create a cottage coffee shop, the model, in 3 years. But right now we have a strong need for a small commercial space. And our interest at the junction is rooted in all aspects of business-wise, social-wise, community-wise, spiritually, culturally, in any way you can think of. And so we're here, my wife and I are here today to declare our interest. We'll work with the stakeholders, and I look forward to, I'm excited the city is ready to roll with it, and we'll give more details as we go. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much.
Good evening. Diana Cohn, Historic Tacoma, 16 Jefferson Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, and also Historic Tacoma Building, which is at 7328 Carroll Avenue. Happy New Year to everyone. First council meeting of 2014. And I'm here tonight, first of all, I'll talk about the proposal for the junction. And I would like to express Historic Tacoma and my appreciation to the city staff and the council people for reaching out as they were thinking about how to go about doing a proposal, that they came and talked to us, and that's we're happy to see that happen. And I notice on the backgrounder for today's discussion in a few minutes that being complementary to the historic context of the district is listed as one of the goals. But as a follow-up to what Jim DeLuigi said, I don't see parking as one of the goals under this section, and I would urge you to make parking a clear objective as parking solution, let's call it that, as a clear objective in however you write the request for proposals. And hopefully there will be some community input even as you prepare that request, and not just once the requests start to come back. That would be another suggestion from Historic Tacoma. The second item that I'd like to address is what Bob Sheldon brought up about the bike racks at the gazebo. If anybody has been at the many street festivals, there is a crowd that gathers in front of the gazebo, and the bike racks will be in the middle of that crowd. It's the same on any of the summer concerts, the December concerts that OTBA does. And there's a little bit of a mismatch between putting bike racks in the center of the audience area. So for those reasons, I would urge that the council consider what Bob Sheldon said. And he did not toot his own horn, which I will do in case those of you don't know, that Bob is one of the preeminent bikers in town. You hardly ever see him not on his bike. And so he knows whereof he speaks. He is a total supporter of bike racks, along with businesses and Historic Tacoma. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lovelace.
Hello, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your official peace delegate. I want to hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas, wonderful New Year's, and we've got one more holiday coming up, and I want people to remember this one too. It's Martin Luther King's birthday coming up January 15th. We'll be having a parade in Southeast Washington, like we do every year, and it's going to be great. I hope everybody from Tacoma Park can come down and take part in it, because it's an important day this year. Because poverty is still a major problem in our country, and now it's even worse. This year, a lot of people had to give up their Christmases and stuff because of the unemployment funds were cut. They cut their benefits off, and it's going to be happening worse and worse as this year goes on. 1.5 million people lost their benefits already, and 4.6 million are going to be losing them again before the end of the year. And I'd like to ask people to think about the people who have lost their Thanksgiving. Their Christmases and their Thanksgivings. How do you explain it to the kids, a 6-year-old kid or a 7-year-old daughter, that there's no Santa Claus this year because we got to pay the rent? And there's no big feast on the table because we can't afford it. The United States cut our funds off. How do we explain that? We should do everything we can, and that means to get out there and vote responsibly, for God's sakes. This is a result of people who don't vote and people who vote irresponsibly, just run in there and rush out without knowing what they're voting for. So please, everybody, you've got to get out there and do something. Help me out. Help me make it. Help me make peace in this world. There's a lot we can do for peace. Just not just pray for it, but we can also work for peace. Do what we can to fund our poor and fund our schools. A lot of children lost their Head Start program last year. A lot of other people have lost their benefits too. And I'm always afraid whether someday or another they're going to say we got the SSI benefits out, and then I'd be lost. I wouldn't be able to afford my rent or my food. And I pray to God, and I ask people to come on out there and help me avoid that. Come on out there and vote. I want everybody who's African American, everybody who's Hispanic, everybody who's of a different race and language than we are, and also people who are disabled, both physically and mentally handicapped, to get out there and vote. anyone who's unemployed has got to get out there and vote to save your skins this time. It's not just you're voting like your ass depends on it. You are voting like it does, because we've got to do what we can. If you care about those people in our country, and you care about our country, get out there and vote responsibly and think about those people who just lost all their benefits this last year for Christmas. Thank you very much. And Happy New Year to everybody who's in the meeting today. Welcome back from the recess. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Peace.
Anybody else wish to make a comment or public comment?
I'll just speak for myself as an individual on this, and I just want to say I appreciated Tim's email about if you ask for an RFP, and I think you should, think about whether you're going to do that. I know you're going to debate it, but I do ask that it doesn't include a residential component. It will make it a lot larger, and I think our needs are more focused on commercial, simple and elegant, something, lots of green. From my standpoint, I'd love to see trees, and I'd like to see a lot of emphasis given to the buildings, finding better uses for the buildings across the street as well. And so and I'm very excited that John is managing those properties, and that's very great. The other thing is, I just wanted to mention your option 2 was a government build option, and it was to build public space or governmental space. And I wonder, and I don't know, but I wanted to just throw this out to you to think about. Is there another way to look at a government build? I mean, is there something that you could raise a bond for through the state and lease the property for a use that you think is a good use that we would like to see? What is it that we need? What is it that we want to see there? That would allow you to perhaps have a gentler use than if you open it up to a bunch of developers, and that's a concern of mine as to what you're going to get back on that. And, other visions of brew pub at Healy Surgeons and, and certainly some expansion of the co-op being a beloved and very necessary building there. So all these things to think about, but I just wanted to thank you for focusing on it and give you some thoughts on this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jeff Trunzo, 119 Sherman Avenue, and I was also a member of the Tacoma Junction Task Force. I wanted to express support in general for the theory of looking at development at the lot now, and certainly everything everyone's spoken about tonight is relevant. A particular concern of mine is that throughout our report, you'll see a lot of analysis, community outreach, and data about what a multimodal transportation disaster that small strip is. We did quite a bit of outreach, and some of the comments from folks unsolicited by us were quite explicit into what a nightmare it was moving through that area. So we see that somewhat as an opportunity, because we're very fortunate that no buildings are right against the street at this point in time. There is a lot of land there. And from my own perspective, I'd certainly like to see something developed that gave us a lot of green space and gave us a very nice separation for bicyclists, folks walking, folks with strollers, families, that sort of thing. Something that really got people off the roadway. We certainly have the improved sidewalks there now, but we're talking about inches, and we were really thinking about something more in terms of feet and yards that the separation would be. And just changing hats for a second, Howard Cohn, the co-chair, also asked me to express his support in principle for opening up the process to consider what needs done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Larry Silverman. I live at 7308 Birch Avenue in Tacoma Park. I also own S&A Beads. On Wednesday, we will do inventory at the bead shop, which is a very daunting task because we have so many little things, such a wide variety and so many of them. And there's a certain pleasure in it to see what you sold and what didn't, and what you need and what you don't need. But the one part of it that is onerous always is the knowledge that we will be taxed on 100% of our inventory. In fact, Tacoma Park is the only town in Montgomery County that taxes the inventory and the equipment of its stores. And it's a hardship. It's a significant amount of money for us and for other stores in the town. I realize it's also a significant amount of money for the city in terms of revenue. It troubles me that I pay a tax on my sort of junky cash register and other equipment that I have, but the bank next door to me does not pay a tax on its equipment. They are exempted by state law. And I know that I've sort of come to realize that the only way we can get some relief on this inventory tax, and by relief I mean deciding to tax not 100% of your inventory at 2%, but 50% or 25% or 10%, as other towns do, such as Gaithersburg. But the only way we're going to get some relief is either the city spend less or that they find new people to tax. And what I would encourage you to do, and the reason I'm here, is I would encourage you to go to your state legislators, our state legislators, and ask them to give you the right to tax the banks in the same way that you can tax the small businesses. I don't know why why my cash register is taxable at 2% of its value, and the bank's computers are not taxable in any percent of the value. So I think that's a way to relieve some small businesses without necessarily cutting into your revenues. It requires state legislation, and I don't think you'll get state legislation unless the city asks for it. I can ask for it all I want, but you have to ask for it. If you do it in a formal way, I think there's a chance you might get it, at least for Montgomery County, and I don't think you're going to scare any banks away. I don't think they're leaving. So I would finally, in closing, I would invite you to view our inventory. As soon as we count what we have, we'll get a lot more. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Roger Schlegel, 6512 Allegheny, and I also served with some other people here on the Tacoma Junction Task Force. And I just wanted to express general support for the idea of exploring possibilities now for this site. A couple of things to keep in mind are just to try to think of the big picture of how that parcel can be integrated with so many close-in residential areas on either side of it. I looked back at the report tonight, and I saw that when we did our outreach and we talked to many people in the community, some of the things that came through were that they still wanted to see some significant availability of space for community use. It has potential. It's centrally located, and if there's something that would complement what's available here, that might be nice. I also was noticing that there was, in a study that was done for OTBA, there was a recommendation to allow for expansion of the co-op. That could be a good function that the community would enjoy. I remember a few other ideas that had come through, which I'll toss out again. Having some kind of dance hall, ballroom type of possibility. Perhaps that could be combined with a removable dance floor that could be an indoor marketing space as well. I mean, certainly that wouldn't need to fill the entire area, but it could be something that you could keep percolating as a possibility. People also wanted to see something that was demonstrating the city's commitment to the environment. So there's going to be a lot of solar potential on anything that might be developed there, and that's something to keep in mind too. And to follow on what Jeff was saying, I think that the traffic flow, pedestrian movement in that area is very tricky. And then we also want to honor the historic shape of the space. So, you know, it would be good to look back at the task force report and see some of the possibilities that were in there. I'll just throw out one, not to endorse it, but it might make more sense from a movement standpoint to have any entry and egress to the structure, say if there were underground parking or something, be aligned with Carroll Avenue, so that would become sort of a cross intersection where if you were coming from the hospital, you could proceed straight across into parking. That might simplify things from a pedestrian and a driver point of view. So, thank you.
Thanks very much. Anybody else? Okay, thank you all for your comments. We'll now move to council comments. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out this evening, and Happy New Year to you all. I'll address three things that have come up in the public comments this evening, starting with the issue that Mr. Schlegel and Mr. Trunzo raised about transportation through the junction. I'll just note that the city had confirmation as recently as last October from Brian Young, the State Highway Administration's district engineer, that, in his words, the installation of a new crosswalk, something that Tacoma Junction Task Force recommended, between the city lot and the Grant Avenue intersection with 410 is on track for fiscal year 15 construction. Fiscal year 15 starts on July 1st, 2014. Secondly, regarding Tacoma Junction parking, there are 2 points. One, I understand that the Old Tacoma Business Association, working with the city, is currently conducting a parking survey. I don't know that there's anything to be said about that right now. I do note that co-executive director Patty Baker is in the room. And then OTBA is also working on a parking availability map. That would be not only for Tacoma Junction, but for all of Old Tacoma. And then also on the parking topic, I want to thank city staff, including the city manager Brian Kenner, and Roz Grigsby, who's here, as well as the other co-executive director of the Old Tacoma Business Association, Laura Barclay, Kay Daniels-Cohen, my colleague, and a number of community members, including Mr. Silverman, who attended a meeting here in the community center on December 17th to talk about Old Tacoma parking. That would be from a number of points of view. One is the parking needs of the businesses for their own employees and patrons. There are concerns, for instance, about availability of parking for current businesses such as the New Republic restaurant, and for incoming businesses such as Busboys and Poets in particular, and then, frankly, protecting the residential neighborhoods that are directly adjacent to the Old Tacoma Business District from parking by patrons of the businesses that would take away even more of the residential parking spaces, which are in somewhat short supply at certain times on certain streets. As an outcome of the December 17th meeting, we have a number of steps to explore to increase the availability of parking in Old Tacoma, or I should say make sure that the availability is at the right level to meet current and anticipated needs for the next years. And then last, on the bike share station, thank you, Mr. Sheldon, for coming out and for the other people who commented on that. I also had, back a couple of months ago, some advocacy from a number of residents in particular who went out and gathered some signatures and so on. Mark Sherman and his wife, Vera Pereira, from residents. The biggest issue there is the availability of an alternative location and the cost of of installing the station in a new location where there could be site preparation involved. And that's all I'll say on that topic for a moment, other than I just really wanted to acknowledge your advocacy on that point. And it's helpful if this is going to get the consideration that we would like to see. That's it. Thank you.
Other colleagues have comments? Councilmember Smith?
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and also would like to wish everyone a Happy New Year. I would like to ask the city manager if he would work with County Council Member George Leventhal's office on writing a letter to the Ride-On bus system. I've received many complaints from residents that the buses, the 12, the 17, the 18, are never on schedule. They provide many smartphone apps that are supposed to indicate when these buses are supposed to come. These apps are woefully incorrect. So I would ask that the city manager work with Councilmember Leventhal, whose staff has been sympathetic to these issues, to see if we can correct them. Thank you.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor, and Happy New Year to everyone. I sort of three issues I want to bring to my colleague and the public's attention. One concerns schools, and particularly overcrowding in some of our schools. This is not a city issue. It's county and the County Board of Education. But we have schools like Rolling Terrace that are the place of learning for many of our kids that are literally hundreds of students over capacity. And more development means more kids. That is not going to change. We know, for example, that we have a vacant school building, the McLaughlin School property, abandoned property back behind on taxes. And so I'm hoping that perhaps my colleagues and I could get together and try to figure out some way to advocate for the county to take a more proactive stance with regard to future improvement in our school infrastructure. We heard from the COG executive director earlier tonight, and talking about activity centers in the county, these places that are close to mass transit and jobs, and there's just so much opportunity happening in Tacoma Park right now with all the development going on the DC side, the potential on the bus rapid transit, the transit center, the Purple Line. You know, what does 5 years from now look like? It looks like we need better services in a lot of ways, and this issue of education is really important. On a separate issue, before the holidays in the fall, we approved installation of stop bars, a new traffic calming device at the intersection of Flower and Jackson Avenue. And some of my colleagues have driven those stop bars, and certainly many members of the public have done so. Some of them are somewhat effective in slowing vehicles at the stop sign, but other portions of the installation are ineffective, in part because cars can position their wheels around the stop bars. And so I think, at least for that stop bar that is the most problematic, literally you can drive right around it, I really hope the city can make an adjustment there. But it raised an important issue, which is that when I was in discussions with the Public Works Director, she indicated some discomfort with city staff making changes to a project in which the description of the project was set by the narrative in front of the ordinance that we approved. And so I hope that at some point we can have a public discussion about that. It's my personal view that when the staff provide background to us, it is background, and the things that are really non-discretionary, or at least take subsequent council action, are those things that we write into an ordinance or a resolution. That the background is something that is advisory. It's what staff expects to happen, but should not be seen as binding. And I'm just hoping that we can make more adjustments to what is meant to be an experimental approach to traffic calming, that we can try new things at this site in the near future for what is still a very low cost investment in our roads in a place that is very problematic with regard to traffic. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I also wish everyone a Happy New Year, and I just wanted to say that I had the opportunity during the holidays to attend the annual celebration with the Liberian American Community Association, and it was an excellent event. Included the ambassador from Liberia, and I just wanted to thank the association for inviting me. Thank you.
I just want to note a couple things that happened at this point a good while ago, but since we haven't really had an opportunity to note any of these things since our last meeting, basically sometime in November, that on November 26th, I went to Piney Branch Elementary School and talked to all 5 classes of 4th graders about if I were mayor, and had, as always, an enjoyable time talking with all of those 4th graders about all kinds of topics. Most of the time was Q&A, and it's always interesting the topics that they bring up and the things that they want to know about. I'll also note that Santa did visit Old Town on December 7th, and again, that was a very interesting time, and learned a lot about a lot of people who came to talk to Santa Claus. And also wanted to note that since we were last here, the Restaurant Republic opened in early December, and we welcomed them to Tacoma Park. And I know that a lot of people have already tried them out and are looking forward to going again. And for those who haven't been, check it out. And we look forward to many new businesses and many new restaurants coming to Tacoma Park. Finally, I will just note that the state legislature opens the 90-day session this Wednesday, and I will be spending a good bit of the day down there, and Councilmember Smith is going to be joining me, and if anybody else wants to go down there, we might be able to coordinate rides. And there's the MML reception from 5 to 7 on Wednesday at the Maryland Inn, and I would encourage my colleagues to attend that as well. And I think that takes care of council comments. We will move to city manager's comments.
No comments.
Okay. Then we have adoption of minutes, and we have 4 sets of minutes.
I would like to move the adoption of the minutes before us.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And that's the minutes for October 28th, November 18th, November 25th, and December 9th. Is there any question about the minutes? Any need to revise anything? I have some edits that I'll hand to the clerk. Okay, all those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted unanimously. We will now go to the work session, and we will have a presentation from staff on city-owned lot in the junction and some options of what to do about that. And welcome to Ms. Grigsby and whoever else is going to talk to us about this.
Yeah, I think
maybe the city manager is going to lead it off.
Yes, I will. I will probably lead it off, and then I will come back in a little bit later. But I wanted to just provide the council and the community with an opportunity to take a look at some of the options that the city has been considering as it relates to the junction. Obviously, I think that we're sort of building upon the foundation that the original Task Force Junction report provided. Sort of that sort of foundation, plus what I'd say are some recent events around not only the junction commercial area, but really throughout the Old Town area, I think is also become a little bit more relevant as it relates to the city-owned lot at the junction, and wanted to provide some analysis around that. So I was going to just kick it off, and then I'm going to hand it over to Roz to go through some of the slides that we have in our presentation, and then I'll come back in with some of the options analysis and some of the recommendations that we have thus far. But as a starter, I guess I will turn it over to Roz, and I'd also like to thank Roz Grigsby and Sarah Daines for their work, not only on this, not only on the PowerPoint, but just their work over the past many years as it relates to the junction, and for helping bring me up to speed, so to speak, on the project. Thank you.
I'll start with the current status of the lot. There have been a number of steps taken since the council has had a comprehensive conversation about next steps. So I wanted to do a brief update. As you recall, the environmental site assessment has been done, Phase 1 and Phase 2, which did not find any serious contaminants at the site. They did 12 borings that were tested. They did 15 borings. There was only one that was on one chemical that was anything above any of the Maryland Department of the Environment standards. That Phase 2 report with the full findings of the chemical analysis is available on the city website. The city attorney has been consulted about the appropriate procedure for disposition of property if the city council deems that it is no longer needed for city purposes. As Councilmember Grimes mentioned earlier, there has been some progress made with SHA on the crosswalk from the city lot across to the intersection at Grant. So that's moving forward. Commercial appraisal was done last summer in June. So we have some idea of the value of the lot now. We have received not only the co-op's proposal that they made in front of council about 18 months ago, but we've also had unsolicited inquiries, proposals, requests that we have been fielding. And of course, the Tacoma Junction Task Force provided kind of steps forward, and one recommendation was to consider the possibility of solicitation for proposals. So having done some of the preliminary work that needed to be in place, certainly what was under the asphalt was a critical question. We have now got at least a starting point of an answer. Some of these pieces are now in place, and the conversation moves forward to the next step. Excuse me. The parcel, as you know, is an irregular shape. It is outlined in red on this map. I hope you can see it clearly on your monitors. The most of the property is an asphalt parking lot. The south end is an unimproved wooded area. There's an odd-shaped piece between Healy Surgeons and the Tacoma Auto Clinic. It's an easement. Part of this property, at one point, included the area that the easement connects to, so that was deeded to the fire station when the expansion was done. So it's an interesting configuration. It gives a lot of possibilities to work with. We included current zoning and the proposed county rewrite zoning for the location. There's been a lot of activity, business activity in the Old Tacoma area in the past 2 years. This is a list of things that have opened and things that are pending that we have enough information to put on the list. As you can see, the majority of these businesses are in the Old Town and Metro area. Richardson School of Music, of course, is at the Junction. It's the newest one to open there. And the long vacant Tacoma Letter Shop at 7212 Carroll Avenue has new owners and is moving forward with a Montessori school.
Does that include the house immediately next door?
It is one property,
Parcel, yeah.
though they expect to do the school in the commercial building, not in the house. Is that what you were asking? Yes. Yeah. As I said, the majority of these have not been at the Junction. The sort of the center of gravity in the Old Tacoma area is more in the Old Town and Metro. We're hoping to build on the momentum that has been developing there with these new business openings and garner some of that for the Junction, which has not experienced that same level of growth. In some cases, the new businesses coming in will present direct competition. Best Boys and Poets includes a market, which will potentially challenge the co-op's plans. So it seems that the time may be ripe to move forward on the council's next question of what you want to do. And do you have, I can do the slides for you, or can you do them from there? I don't know. Okay, just let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roz. Sort of we began to think a little bit more about what the available options were. We wanted to sort of start from nothing. We wanted to make sure that we included as many potential options, even if we could, maybe out of hand dismiss them. We wanted to make sure that we actually considered them and went through a thoughtful analysis of what the available options were. This is just a very small matrix that talks a little bit about four of what I call sort of the basic options that we came up with. The first one, which effectively is just keeping the lot exactly as it is today. Second option, government build, is a determination that the city would make, which is that instead of deciding effectively that the lot is excess in some way to the city, that it is needed for a public purpose of some kind. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the option 2. Option 3 is to enter into an exclusive negotiation with a interested party. So we know that we've had at least one unsolicited offer that has come to the council last year, actually it'd be 2012, I guess, at this point. So one option could be to take one of the unsolicited proposals and just say that is the party we would like to begin to negotiate with as it relates to what would happen on that site. So that option is available in terms of the disposition authority to the city. The final option is sort of taking option 3 and making it more robust by saying to go out with a solicitation of some sort and figure out from all the interested parties effectively what would be their best offer, not only obviously from a perspective of historic context and environmental sustainability and transportation related, but also best options in terms of value, community and financial, that would come to the city, because it is a city-owned lot. From a fiduciary perspective, the city obviously has a responsibility to make sure that we get the value from the site, because the site does contain value. I think Roz mentioned earlier we do have an appraisal that we've performed on the site now, so that is a consideration as we think about disposition. That obviously, as we think about it and reading the task force report, that's not an overriding requirement, I would say. Moreover, I could certainly see situations where the city could say for certain public goods we would trade value for that, that we would consider open space or community use or affordable housing, many other sort of public goods we would exchange for actual value on the site. Next slide. So we'll just go through these. I don't want to belabor them too much. I think most people have probably either seen it online and read it or otherwise, but just sort of going through them sort of quickly. The first option, status quo. For each of the options, we tried to look at just generally what would be some of the pluses and minuses, and then assuming we were to move forward, what would be some of the considerations we would have, from a city's perspective to make. First option, just keeping the site as is. The positive, obviously, is that there's no change that is required. The lot currently functions as a parking lot. We have recently just striped it. We are, I think, as per some of the conversations we had earlier last year, we're in the process of putting a parking meter system out there so that we can begin to enforce the lot. We've always got some of the spots available for the co-op, as has already been negotiated with them in a lease. So the lot could stay effectively as it is. Obviously, from the disadvantage perspective of that, doesn't provide any future for what could potentially happen at the site. And also, just some of the unsolicited proposals we've gotten thus far are just left unsolicited at this point. So it is certainly an option that can be pursued. Option 2. Government build. In many ways, this was the most difficult option to evaluate and will remain a difficult option to evaluate, only in that this option would effectively provide an opportunity for the city to continue to use the site for something probably other than a parking lot. So the positives are this over this option are that the city retains 100% control over all aspects of the site, which obviously, all things being equal, is a more desirable thing. The city can control timing, and theoretically or potentially, the project can serve as a catalyst for other potential needs at the site. and throughout the junction. Obviously, in terms of negatives, the first question is the what. The city would have to determine what would be needed there. The second would be how to pay for it. I know that I think the last sort of large-scale public bond issue that the city went through was for DPW facility and this facility, and so it would be engaging in a discussion of where the city would find available resources to build whatever it wanted to build. Decision points going forward for that would be the identification of what would need to be built, how to pay for it, and then just think through some of the construction and timeline aspects for that. Option 3, this would be the exclusive negotiation with an unsolicited offer that we have right now. Again, the positives for this is that some parties have already indicated interest, so we already have some folks that are interested in the site. So it would really just be moving quickly to begin to negotiate with one of those. The city can legally do that as per the disposition authority that the city has. Negatives, obviously, are that it's impossible to know whether or not we'd be receiving the highest and best value for the site. Moreover, it's difficult to evaluate what we would be leaving behind without knowing what other options are out there, and that we would just be negotiating with somebody who's put in an unsolicited proposal. Decision points going forward is we just have to identify what kinds of issues we wanted to use to frame our negotiation with that party, and then just begin the exclusive negotiation period. Final option, which is to put out some sort of solicitation. In this context, we're calling it a request for proposal, but I think it's probably best to think of it just as a solicitation. The positives, obviously, from this are to have a sort of thorough, more robust process for getting potential development and other opportunities on the site. You also have the advantage of putting potential proposals in more of a competitive situation, which requires them to be a little bit more competitive and perhaps push the envelope on certain aspects that the city may, again, favor because they know that they're competing against one another. Some of the cons for this mostly relates to timeline compared to some of the other options. It may take longer, especially compared to option 3, where you're exclusively negotiating with one party. It may take longer to get to a proposal because you've got to actually go out there, allow for entities to respond and to come up with options, and so it's going to take a little bit longer. Plus, this option, similar to option 3, I think, especially compared to option 2, the government build option, it cedes some control of the site. Whenever you put a piece of parcel out and you call it excess and you say that it's open for non-governmental use, you are ceding some control. And that has to be a concept that obviously the city has to be comfortable with if they want to put this out there. That's not to say that the city would be obligated under this option to accept any proposal or to not shape or form a proposal, because that's what municipalities do. If I were to use this as an example, they typically put out a solicitation, they get back offers, and then they begin sort of a robust period of negotiation with that offer to figure out what are the public benefits that we can get from this option, vice some of the costs that may be there. But you do give up some control if you don't just build it yourself. Next steps for that would just be the whole solicitation process, getting community input in on the proposals, getting the council review, and then moving forward with a selected proposal. Given all that, we tried to think about, what were some of the current factors that were influencing the lot, in particular right now. I think it was mentioned earlier, we have a new successful restaurant that is opened. We obviously have some additional commercial establishments that have started to open closer to the D.C. side. We have Busboys and Poets, which is opening, which is another large-scale restaurant, which will have a market concept as a part of its restaurant. So we try to think of, what is that area, the junction, and how can the city most appropriately try to figure out a way to support it. So two things sort of came up as we were contemplating the options. One is that the city wants to have a process that's open. We did not want to propose something where we'd be limiting who could potentially participate or the manner in which we'd be able to see who would give us proposals back. And so that became sort of an important concept as we were thinking about the recommendations. The second one is for the city to think about how it can support this business corridor. Again, you've got some businesses, and as Roz had sort of said earlier, you're seeing a subtle, but it's actually becoming perhaps more dramatic now, a shift of where you're seeing more residential activity. You're seeing more residential activity in our Old Town and closer to the D.C. side. This obviously is a heavily trafficked area. If you look at foot count and car count from a retailer's perspective, I think you think that this would be a highly desirable area. Yet it has some challenges. It has challenges in terms of size. It has challenges in terms of parking. Has some challenges in terms of connectivity, which our project isn't necessarily going to solve. But the question is, are there ways that our project can help make those things better for the existing businesses that are there? Again, you've got a handful of businesses over there, and the idea is to obviously try to make them better. Is to support that corridor and how it functions. You've got an important, I think, tenant over there already, which is the co-op, which is taking up, probably the largest square footage of any business in the Junction area, and they've expressed some interest in expanding, trying to grow their square footage. But to be honest, I would never speak for the co-op, but I mean they have to figure out where they can sort of best operate. And so I'm sure in terms of their analysis, they're also thinking about, is this location actually the best place long term to locate? And so as we began to think about how the city-owned lot could be helpful to the existing businesses, we wanted to make sure that we provided that vitality, that connectivity if we were going to try to do something on the site. Something that was going to attract additional businesses in the area, and something that was also going to help stabilize that section of the Old Town business area. Again, we're seeing more competition happen, and I think that's just going to increase going forward. So how can we make sure that we're providing something that's going to continue to draw people to that end? With that, our recommendation is to move forward with some sort of solicitation. With that as our sort of next decision point that we made, we came sort of to the harder part, which is, so how do we frame it? How do we make sure that we're getting proposals that give the city the highest and best value, both from a community perspective, environmentally sustainable perspective, historic context, and a financial perspective? So we began to think a little bit about what would sort of frame the solicitation if we were to put one out. And we sort of came away with three overarching goals. We wanted to be a catalyst and a stimulus to the existing commercial district and to the locally owned independent businesses. Obviously, that is the brand of that area, and we would not want to interfere with that. We want to make sure that we improve the aesthetic appeal of the Junction Commercial District, again, providing some sort of a catalyst for what that area is going to look like to continue to draw additional activity. But also, the third one, to be complementary to the historic context and to be environmentally sustainable. I think those are obviously things that, not just for the placement of where it is in the junction, but just speaking to who Tacoma Park is. I think we would certainly want to encourage proposals that would be indicative of that. As we sort of wrestled with how to put these some of the framework goals together, what also became evident as we were talking is, there's a lot of additional requirements that we could put into this sort of solicitation, or we could frame this by. And as we began to sort of mull it over, I think where we ended up is that it's hard for us to say what we don't want. It's very difficult for me to say that absolutely under no circumstance would I want any residential at the site. Now that may be, given the residential opportunities that someone may propose, we may actually end up saying that's something that we don't appreciate. But it may be difficult if someone were to bring us something that included some elements of residential along with other green and/or other environmentally sustainable or historically significant sort of packaging with that, it may be something that we might want to consider. I think that the lot, and I'm sure Roz will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm not sure the last time that the lot has publicly been out for people to provide what they might potentially want to do at the site. And so with just the passage of time, with the fact that we're seeing some additional commercial activity, with the fact that financial markets are becoming a little bit more liquid these days. We went to the OTBA executive board meeting, and it seemed like from some of the development partners that were there that they were seeing activity happening in some of their other projects. They were seeing tenant mixes turn over a little bit more. They were seeing projects perhaps being more easily able to get financed. Those are positives as it relates to a site that's got some challenges like our site has. One of the reasons why sometimes sites like this can take a little bit of time to figure out is because they have a lot of challenges, and so you got to pick the right time to go out with what are those opportunities, how do people see them, and how do you frame them. With that, I think that our feeling internally here is that this is probably the right time. 2 years ago was a very different world as it relates to potential opportunities and people who are interested. I think that now is probably a better time to gauge what is the potential use of the site and what would somebody propose there. So just two additional sort of lines. We started to think, what would we ask from interested parties? So what would the requirements be? And again, the concept is to not be terribly prescriptive if we don't have to. We want to provide people context. We want to tell them what we think is important. What we think is important is for them to provide some sort of project concept plan. We want to see a vision. We want to see what the neighborhood benefits are. We want to see visual images of what the site can be. We want to see what your vision is for the site. Second, we want to see how you would propose to finance it. There's no sense in seeing something that looks extremely pretty and has a great vision if it's not economically feasible. We've got to have some ability for you to demonstrate that you've thought about how you're going to finance putting something like this together. Finally, we wanted to get some information as it relates to the qualifications and experience. Have you done similar projects like this before? What is your capability in doing a development of this scale? As it relates to requirements, again, what you'll see is these are more general and more broad for a reason. We are not, I think internally our thought process is there are some things we would like for you to address, but we did not want to preclude too much how people were going to respond back, because there may be great things that I can't personally envision right now that somebody may put together that might be interesting. The second part of that is, so once we ask people for information, how will we evaluate the information that we get back? So again, just from the broad perspective, we thought we'll look at the overall vision and concept, we'll look at your ability to implement the project that you're proposing, and we'll look at your financing structure. Does it seem reasonable? The next steps, and I hesitated even putting something like this on paper because timelines are so subjective in general, but I wanted to provide something just in the sense of order of magnitude a little bit. And I think the time here is obviously much less important than the process, which is mostly what I wanted to outline here. Releasing a solicitation can happen. I think this seems like a good time of the year, a time in the market to release something. Once that happens, our next big task is going to be getting interest. I want to make this very clear that just releasing a solicitation does not guarantee anything. In the past, I think that actually interest has been somewhat tepid on the site because of some of the challenges, and that very well could happen again. And so there's going to have to be a robust marketing effort to get interested parties out. Before we even had this presentation, we've been trying to talk to just some of the stakeholders in the area to get their thoughts and feelings, and we'll continue to do that as we sort of think about this. But our next step would be to really go out and try to talk to some of the folks that might be interested in actually proposing on the site. We've talked to a few, but I want to talk to anybody who's interested in potentially bidding on something on the site. So that would be the next step in the process, is to do a marketing effort around the solicitation. The third step would be to actually get the solicitation and get the proposals back, which would be the RFP due sort of period. The fourth step is to go through some sort of an evaluation, which mostly is just a sharpening of the proposals that have been presented. There was no decisions that will be made in that time period. It's really just getting the proposals such that they're even and uniform in terms of, have you provided all the information that we've asked? Have you clarified all the potential questions that would come up? Because it's really steps 5 and step 6 that are the important parts of this process, which is that our expectation is that each of these potential proposals would come and do public presentations. They would have to get public support and public input into their projects, because that obviously is the crux of the development. That site is located within neighborhoods, within communities, and so we want to make sure that there's opportunities for the public to comment and input on that process, and to have plenty of time to be able to do that. Then after that comes a subsequent sort of council review period, which is again just another opportunity in my mind for additional community and public input into the process. And so again, the time in terms of days is much less important to me than the actual process that we would be going through, which is to try to make sure that we get solid proposals in the first half, which makes the second half much better, which is then looking at the proposals that we have and making some determinations around what we like and what we don't like. Some of the things that additional items that sort of came up as we were talking about this was the size of the site, and would we accept proposals potentially that included adjacent or adjoining properties? And I think absolutely we would be interested to see what people's concepts were as it relates to not just our site, but how it would connect or how it might even include other sites. We obviously want to make sure that we've got sort of a historic and neighborhood context to our site, and so we would encourage people to reach out to those stakeholders in the community that are familiar with that, so that they can get a sense about what might work in a community such as this. With that, I think I will turn it over to see if there's any questions.
Let me start with just a couple of things to clarify what you've presented. The first one that I wanted to double check is on the map you talk about the city lot all having C1 zoning. Did that change? It used to be split between C1 and residential?
It is split.
It is?
It's a mistake in our map. The wooded area on Columbia is R60. It's residential.
Okay.
We didn't get into that level of detail in a very small space
Right.
on the
Okay.
map.
I just
but
want to
you're
make
right.
sure something hadn't changed.
It hasn't.
Okay. And I know questions have come up in the past about potential disposition of the site, referring back to the method by which we acquired it. And can you just speak to that?
As the mayor's indicated, a variety of funding sources were used to acquire the property when it was purchased back in the early 1995, including of which was the HUD's 108 loan program, which is a guarantee of future community development block grant allocations. We've just located the loan agreement, and in reviewing it, it looks as though the obligation that the city has to repay those CDBG funds has expired, but I haven't had an opportunity to have that confirmed as yet. So if the property were to, if a proposal were accepted by the council and there was a provision in there to purchase the property from the city, those funds that were used to acquire the property in the first place may have to be repaid to the county and would come out of the proceeds of any sale of the property. Does that make sense?
And the operative word there is may.
May. Once we've been able to confirm that, I'll let you know.
And the third question I had was looking at the fourth option that you recommend and trying to make sure that I understand the balance that you propose, the extent to which you give particulars in putting out the RFP, and the extent to which you don't put constraints on it by using particulars. And I'll use as an example the concerns expressed by a number of members of the public tonight about parking is essential. How do you approach something like that in terms of being prescriptive about what should be included or what the vision is, and how much do you leave it as we want to hear what people's ideas are, we can get to those particulars later in the process?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we would do, and I apologize, it's probably not on this piece of paper, but obviously I think from this conversation we've heard some input around it, is we want to make sure that people think a little bit about parking. That obviously is an issue right now for the existing businesses that are there. It also theoretically will be an issue for whatever's proposed there, but it's difficult for me to say how much parking would be needed because I don't exactly know what's being proposed there. Obviously, I think any credible proposal is going to have to address that because whatever they're trying to attract or propose that would go there is going to need to be able to be parked. And so I think we would ask for some sort of, generally, how would you approach parking solutions on the site and see the response that we get back. And, I think the good thing is during the evaluation period, if we feel like we need further clarification from them on what they're proposing, we have every opportunity to do so.
So we try and identify some general issues that will need to be addressed, and then in the process leave it for them to specify how they would address it, and then depending on those answers and what we see from all of the proposals, then start to refine things.
Exactly right.
Okay. Thanks. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian Rise, I want to thank you for the presentation. You answered most of my questions. I wanted to know if you guys modeled disposition options, which made better sense, to sell the property or to engage in a ground lease?
We have not modeled that yet. I have seen many properties go fee simple, and I have seen many go 99-year ground lease. Any financial institution will always tell you that it's easier to finance a property that you're selling effectively than one that you're leasing long term. But I think we're not putting any requirements or restrictions, and we're not saying how we'd like to see it. We'd like for somebody to propose something, and I think then we can evaluate it.
Okay.
But I certainly know that it would be a little bit more difficult to finance it probably if you're talking about a ground lease versus selling it.
All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thanks. My thanks also for a strong presentation that pretty faithfully matches the community discussions that have been going on for several years now. So I'm very glad about that latter point. I have a number of questions and suggestions. One regards the evaluation process for proposals. Oh, I should say I'm in favor of moving forward with a solicitation. Regarding the evaluation, the Tacoma Junction Task Force did a good job of soliciting community views. There have been other community involvements, the SS Carroll Neighborhood Association, then a informal working group of residents and so on. I ask that community members be involved, working with the city staff in evaluating proposals, and before that in coming up with maybe more detailed assessment criteria for proposals. That should happen soon if it's going to happen in order to have as much information available to potential bidders as possible. So I would like to see creation of some kind of group that would involve residents in the creation of assessment criteria and in the evaluations themselves. You, City Manager, mentioned one thought, which is adjacent properties. I also believe that the city should welcome, but certainly not require, welcome any proposals that would involve the developer's acquisition of adjacent properties or the developers working in cooperation with the owners of adjacent properties. I will say something that didn't come up because I don't like the idea of the cities exercising any form of eminent domain in order to acquire properties. I view that as pretty negative. I'll also say now that I think that the character of the site, the C1 zoning, I just checked, has a height limit of 30 feet. That's 2.5 stories according to zoning code and so on. I don't think we would be well served by having a single building that would span multiple properties with a sort of monolithic approach there. So I would be careful about any kind of phrasing of an invitation to include adjacent properties in a proposal. I wouldn't want the city to suggest that we're looking. Now, there could be disagreement, I realize. But personally, I wouldn't want to see the city suggest that we want some building that, for instance, would span everything from Sycamore Avenue to the fire station. I see Mr. Robinson here is on the co-op board. I did have a conversation with the board chair of the co-op that they are considering, that's not to say that they're going to put anything forward, but they are considering an alternative approach that they had not brought to the city in 2012 that would involve development in a different direction from the proposals that they brought to us already. So don't consider I don't think anyone does, but I'll say it anyway, don't consider what the co-op brought to us in 2012 as being the current state of the co-op's thinking. And the last point I'll make regarding whether the city would have some, I forget the term that Councilmember Smith used, a leasehold or ground lease. Yeah, versus selling the property itself, that I assume that if we did a ground lease, we wouldn't get property tax revenue from the land, although we might from the building.
We would probably have to do a little bit more research. I have seen leasehold improvements before be taxed in some jurisdictions at least, but I'd have to see. We'd have to verify under that scenario what could happen.
Right. So I wouldn't argue that the city should look for the maximum financial return from the developer, but the financial return is an important consideration, and the future revenues to the city from property taxes would be part of that. That's all I have for right now, but I like the direction that we're moving in here. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my first question concerns the RFP process that you proposed, and I guess what I was originally envisioning was that it would be more of a request for interest, a more general, maybe even more aspirational, less about the financing phase, that then allowed us, the community, to look at those sort of visions, and then from that set of visions, choose a subset from which to get the more serious proposals. A process like that would take more time. Your timeline would have another 90 days in it at least. So I just wanted to bring that up to just have you discuss, why the staff have recommended the path that you've taken.
Yeah, that the idea of what in that option 4, what kind of solicitation effectively we would be asking for, whether it's something that's more of a qualifications ask, which is mostly about vision and concept a little bit more, and less so on feasibility, and could still have some experience. I think 2 things have changed probably since the last time I sort of chatted informally with the council about this that has at least swayed me that I think asking for a proposal it might be a better step at this point. One is that we've gotten some more interest. We've got a few businesses that have proactively reached out to us to say, what is the city doing with the site? Because we'd be interested. And I think that I would love to be able to ask them those questions about, what would you propose? And I would love to be able to get, at this stage, I'd love to be able to get more information from them versus less information quicker. And so, at least in my mind, I see the process, whether it's RFP or RFQ proposals or qualifications, similarly in that we're asking for a proposal from an interested party, And then we've still got an evaluation phase and a community input phase and a council review phase that's still going to enable us to be able to have that proposal sharpen its pencil if it needs to, address certain issues if we wanted to address, and have the opportunity for the community to comment on what it is they're proposing. I'm seeing asking for a little bit more information now as being a plus or a value to the city as opposed to asking for less information at this juncture. And honestly, the other reason is that it's a competitive environment. I do not want to undersell that site has been underutilized for a long time, and lots of other sites in Tacoma Park and close to Tacoma Park are being seen as more favorable. And for the long-term sustainability of that important business corridor, that's a problem. That's something that the city needs to take seriously. And trying to do something that will enable potential interested parties, if the co-op is interested, continue to be successful and vital and creative, and provide them opportunities, especially with other establishments coming close to them that could be competitive. I think it's important that we get proposals that are somewhat filled out a little bit so that we can really evaluate them.
Thanks. Follow-up issue, a member of the public earlier referred to my initial early opposition to residential, and I say that because I just can't imagine us getting a proposal that doesn't involve residential of more than 2 stories, more than 30 feet. And, maybe I'm wrong, but I just imagine if we truly leave it open-ended, if we don't, for example, put height restrictions or some sort of statement in our RFP that says something like, we have difficulty imagining a viable proposal that would be in keeping with the character of the neighborhood, the historic zone, that would exceed the restrictions of the current commercial zone, or anything like that. Or, for example, that we would be likely to put an easement on the property before any exchange that would preclude any future height extension over whatever the number is. To me, just those seem like sort of meaningful things. I can't a 3-story, 4-story, 5-story building.
Yeah, the requirements that we're putting, I think, now is that we want you to be consistent with zoning, either current zoning or the proposed zoning, and the historic district. And so we do want to give them some envelope.
Mm-hmm.
Can I envision? I guess I can envision lots of permutations or options that someone could propose, limited scale residential, that perhaps we might find viable. At this stage, I just don't want to necessarily preclude it, I guess.
Yeah, and it's just what I'm getting at is just I hope that we do preclude or do make clear that those really are limits, binding limits, right, that we would through any negotiation make them so. Beyond just, okay, let's do the sale and take your word for it that the property will always stay that way. So we would really use the fact that we own it to really ensure a very, very long-term future scope of use. And then the other issue I was going to ask about, and I would encourage us to do in the proposal is, and I'll just put it on the table, that I can't imagine all the businesses in that area, we heard testimony from the public earlier tonight, remaining viable without needing some of the parking in that space. We've heard before about the idea of underground parking and access onto Columbia Avenue. I don't think there are any residents here from Columbia Avenue tonight, but if we consider proposals like that, I have no doubt we will have residents from Columbia and Sycamore here who are concerned about parking lot access onto their lands. And so I think we need to maintain enough parking in the junction. And I think you're going in the right direction, that we don't know exactly how that would work out. But what I wanted to get to was seeing Republic open now. All I can think about for the now, a year and a half, 2-year, 3-year, 4-year vacant space across the street is how much that could be a viable space, either as a single building as it is today or a double-wide building, with the Grant Avenue Street closed off permanently, selling that part of city property, to put business facing on that Grand Avenue space, open seating, awnings, that sort of thing. So that to me is a viable business with a new crosswalk that comes from the parking lot, that has valet parking from Republic over to the city lot, that creates another stream of revenue. But when you define adjacent, my ask is just that you include adjacent as buildings next to, across the street from, that sort of thing.
We do not at all want to preclude the definition of adjacent. I want it to be as broad as possible. I'm hopeful that someone would propose something that would also enliven businesses or other public assets across the street or next door. I mean, that's the point of us putting out a solicitation like this.
Great, thank you. And I'm supportive of us moving forward.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Kenner, for bringing this to us tonight. I really appreciate your bringing this to us so soon after your employment with the city, addressing one of the key issues that we had discussed during your interviews. I joined the council, and at the time I joined in 1999, the city lot had been in the city's possession for some time, and so I think option number one, status quo, has been tested thoroughly, and I think it's time to move on from that. I haven't heard of a need for expanded government space in the city. Some people on Oswego Avenue might appreciate having the mulch pile moved, but I'm not sure this will be a viable option for that. I fully support your recommendation of option number 4. I think it's in the best interest of the taxpayers of the city to reach out to find out what are the alternatives that people see, and you're doing it in a way, suggesting to do it in a way that that really safeguards our interests and allows us to see what the ideas are, what are the brainstorms people can come up with, and backed up with some plans on how it could happen. Mr. Mayle mentioned the two things I had on my list, which was the parking, that we're not just looking for parking solutions for the site, but parking solutions for the area. And the other one was the height. I like Mr. Mayle's suggestion that we, again, safeguard the interests of the community in the final sale process, but we leave it pretty open in the solicitation process because who knows, someone might propose a string of 4-story Victorian homes, and everybody loves them. So let's see what people propose, and then we can decide what we want to do. So thank you.
And I want to go back for a second to the point that Councilmember Mayle was making about potential restrictions in terms of massing or height, and just get a clarification from staff about what the current zoning or the proposed revised zoning might allow in terms of, or even not just so much. I'm not looking for specific numbers, but I'm looking for just a general statement about how that current zoning or that potential zoning under a new zoning code would restrict what could be done and how that might be changed or undermined. The potential for something like that, is it something that a developer might propose to say, well, you've got C1 zoning now, but under the proposed zoning of CR whatever, I've got this flexibility, so kind of how that changes.
As I mentioned earlier, the county is in the middle or towards the end of rewriting the zoning code, so we're all still learning about the new ramifications of that. My expectation is that the new zoning code will be in place before this ever comes to development, and we hope to encourage potential applicants to consider that, because I think that will be the world they're working in when the time comes. The biggest piece here, of course, is that it's in the historic district, so we have not only the backup and protections of the county zoning law, but we have the historic district restrictions. And so the proposed change, it would be a mixed-use commercial resident, it's CRT, which is one of the commercial residential mixed-use zones that the county is proposing. The development allowed would be the FAR, the floor area ratio, which is a ratio of built environment to the land itself, would be 0.5 for commercial, 0.25 for residential. Again, this all happens in the context of the historic district. And so I actually don't share the worry that there would be some massive monolithic building that none of us want, because there are protections in place already that work with keeping it, both the height and the massing, within the context of the historic district.
Which is what FAR is all about. Floor area ratio.
Right.
Okay. And I'll just say that in general, I'm in favor of the direction as proposed by staff. I think it's going to be good to get to, I think this will kind of encompass everything, whether it be the proposals that have come unsolicited or any new ideas. And I'm heartened to hear that there has been some unsolicited interest in the lot, because my experience with any attempts to consider what to do with the lot in the past was it was really hard to get anybody interested because it was such a difficult property. And so hearing of that change in the current environment makes me think that there might actually be some interest that will bring potentially interesting possibilities to us. Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the CRT zoning. I mean, in my mind, 99 times out of 100, zoning and the historic district are great. That's what we've got. But in this case, we actually own the property. And so I'm just urging us to, given that this is a very rare case, we actually own property that we might be disposing of, that we use that ownership to put protections that are even more secure than zoning is. Zoning changes. There are lots of people who are unhappy about this round of zoning changes. There will be future zoning changes. Our community will be here for 100 years, 1,000 years. Let's think about that long-term future and the fact that we own the property and just be really thoughtful about that. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
I'll just make a remark about parking, that the Tacoma Junction Task Force did study the parking availability and write it up in the report that's available still. And one idea that the task force evaluated briefly was whether Grant Avenue could be closed and turned into essentially a cul-de-sac with parking there. That would depend on the configuration of the traffic flow and pedestrian and all that kind of stuff in the rest of the junction. So that wasn't a recommendation. It was just something brought up. And the task force's report does include some detail on parking spaces available to particular businesses and some that are not available that are used for storage of various types. I think they were referring to the fire station parking and all of that kind of stuff. But I suggest taking another look at that regarding parking. And I think that even if the lot were substantially developed, there could be a fair amount of parking for public availability and not just for the availability for the businesses and patrons in that lot that would might feel is satisfy the needs of the rest of the businesses in the junction in conjunction with the spaces that are available off the city lot.
So it sounds like the council is in favor of the option number 4 as proposed by staff. What else do you need from us this evening to kind of proceed to the next phase that you would need to do, and what does that mean in terms of what comes back to us next?
So I think feedback was really the number one thing that I was looking for tonight, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I think we just need to go back and then sort of figure out how best to sort of move forward now that we sort of have some agreement that the process in general works, but I've heard some things tonight that we probably just want to tweak a little bit.
So basically, you'll be following the timeline that you set out, but kind of defining it a little clearer.
Exactly right. So
I just want to get a little bit more sense for people who are here or people who are listening about what they should expect coming back to the council next, kind of what the next step is and the opportunity for input, because I can imagine that some people are thinking, well, I'm not exactly sure what's going to be happening next.
So, certainly we'd want to refine the process in terms of some of the timeline items. I also think we would obviously want to go back out and just make sure that we've hit as many of the stakeholders as we need to and as we can to sort of make sure that the solicitation itself has sort of thought about all the elements. Obviously, parking is one that I heard tonight that we want to make sure is there. So in my mind, we'd be coming back with just sort of like what the next step is in terms of the process timeline, and then just making sure that the community and that you all were just updated on exactly where we were in terms of what our next step is.
And the time frame for that might be a couple of weeks?
Probably within a couple of weeks, yes.
Okay, so you'll come back to the council, we'll schedule something on an agenda for kind of a check back and next step.
Exactly.
Councilmember Grimes?
I've suggested that community members be involved in the creation of assessment criteria and the evaluation of any proposals. If that's going to happen, then we need to get the ball rolling on setting something up if it's going to be done formally. So I'm curious whether my council colleagues favor that proposal or disfavor it. Repeating a formal involvement of citizens in the evaluation process.
I'd just like to check first to the city manager about kind of how you would envision something like that happening.
I can certainly envision that, at least in my mind right now, more easily in the evaluation part. Right now, the idea is really just to try to get proposals out. I'm trying to be fairly broad, and I've gotten certainly some feedback tonight. But I don't know what else to... It's difficult for me to say what else there is to sort of grab a hold of at this point until we get something back, and then we can sort of, I think, more appropriately figure out exactly what it is that we have. I mean, that's just my personal thought.
Yeah, I understand that you're going to go beyond the bullet points that are in here regarding what the proposals should contain and how they will be evaluated, what criteria. I understand that, and I agree with what you're saying, that it would be more important to have others involved in the evaluation of proposals rather than the creation of assessment criteria. So, yeah, if I heard you right, then, yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Mann.
Just on the two issues that were raised, I don't think we need to create a formal citizen input process at this point. I mean, frankly, to be honest, I really like the idea of getting all of these proposals, and then every single member of the public has the equal ability to weigh those proposals that we get. Whereas in some issues there's a real sort of definitional question. To me, at the proposal review stage, we don't have that uncertainty where task forces or committees are so helpful. So I don't think we need to do that. I was a little confused per the mayor's comments, because my understanding from this timeline and one I'm supportive of is that the staff would develop the RFP and release the RFP without a subsequent council meeting in January, which I support. I could be convinced that we need another council review of the RFP, but I don't know that that's the case.
I was more suggesting that we would just come back with a more accurate view of the timeline that we would be moving out with. That was my anticipation. I don't know if that was your similar.
I just wanted to get your sense of next steps, because I wanted there to be clarity both for the council and for the public about kind of what we would see next.
Yeah, next would be, I think, an articulation of what we think in terms of the next steps for this timeline, that staff would continue to work on the solicitation and that we would move forward with issuing that solicitation. And, as I said, I think most of the heavy lifting comes when we get some proposals back, because, again, today I don't have anything. There's absolutely nothing for us to consider at this moment.
So there's no, just to clarify, there's no additional council decision or necessarily even a work session in January. The RFP is still on schedule for January, and we would get an additional update about that. We might see a copy of the RFP. Is that?
That would be correct.
Okay.
So it could come back in the form of city manager's update or however it best works.
Exactly.
But again, I just want to make sure that people don't walk away going, so what's happening next and what's the timeline and when do we get a chance to comment?
Exactly.
The chance to comment is always. And any questions, ask me, ask your council member, ask the city manager, ask staff, ask Roz, ask Sarah, and this will continue to be refined. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And certainly the solicitation itself will be available to the public should anyone want to see that. Now, I fully support the process as you've outlined it, but I would respectfully suggest to the mayor that we should soon start on forming, working with the public to make sure that we have many active community members to look at the proposals when they do come in. And knowing how long it takes for the council sometimes to do things, it might be better to start early on that.
Councilmember Grimes.
Yeah, so I want to elaborate on involvement of citizens in the evaluations. It's very different. Inviting people to comment in, say, a forum like this where each individual comes up to the podium is very different from having some form of committee or task force or working group, whatever you choose to call it, where the individuals involved have discussions. They work out for themselves differences among themselves. They also consult their neighbors. They go beyond what the council can do, and in particular what the council can do in a formal setting like this one. It's very different having an opportunity to comment, expecting people to come here, from having a working group, task force, committee, whatever you wish to call it. I really think we need to have a constituted, whatever we wish to call it.
I don't hear anybody saying we shouldn't.
Me.
It depends on timing.
That's true.
I think we should do it once all of the proposals have come in.
Right,
And then-
but I don't, but what I'm hearing is a wish to make sure, to not kind of wait until they've all come in before going out and soliciting people for interest to be involved in that.
One of the things we can do is we can certainly come back with just the next steps just in terms of timeline and so forth, but we can also come back with a recommendation probably to the council about how community involvement, once we get the proposals back, will sort of look. I mean, I appreciate Councilmember Mayo's comment that sometimes, I mean, there are communities immediately adjacent and around that we would certainly want to make sure get heard. But it's a community asset. I mean, everybody probably goes by that site and is going to interact with that site at some point if they live in Tacoma Park. And so having opportunity for everybody to really comment, I think, will be important.
Right. Okay.
I mean, just my comment is really when you pick a committee, you give some members of the community a stronger voice than others. That's what would happen if we create a committee around this issue. If we're truly looking at proposals, deciding, along this timeline of by July and then subsequently September, our council selecting a developer, I think that's the way I'm reading it, to move forward with. If we pick a committee, it is giving a stronger voice to one set of members in the community than elsewhere.
Why didn't that criterion apply? I know you like to be challenged. Why didn't that criterion apply when it came to the city manager search, the environment committee? We have many committees, and the people have said we are willing to spend the time, and committees typically do take it as part of their mandate to go out and consult community members and not just assert their own opinions and so on. We do it all the time, and I don't see the committee members having special power or something like that as either a threat or anything exceptional.
I mean, we often receive feedback from committee members, dissenting views about how that's not the case, about how committees often do represent parochial views. And I see this issue as very different in that there's once we get proposals back, it's not an open-ended thing anymore. It's very specific. We have a very specific description of what the different options are. I think that setup to me is something that's designed for every member of the community to be able to participate equally in.
And how would you do that?
By using our normal council process of having agenda items.
Would we get the same biased opinions?
Having committee doesn't mean you can't do these other things, and and the committee members don't have a vote. It's we up here who have the vote.
I look forward to the city manager's recommendation on community outreach.
Yes.
As do I.
And this conversation has devolved a bit from the subject. So we will conclude it there, and we'll take a short break, and we'll come back for the remaining items on the agenda. First one is discussion about the Montgomery County Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Sorry. Yes, so I think in front of you, you've got just a brief summary of this. I will try to make what I think is a longer story short. Montgomery County has put together its hazard mitigation plan, which I have here, which is a very thick binder. They have approved the plan as of July, both by the council, Montgomery County Council, as well as FEMA has approved the plan. The plan has been in development since November 2011. The development team that was putting together the plan included the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security for the county, Park and Planning, PEPCO, and at least one representative from 19 other municipalities in Montgomery County, including Tacoma Park. Captain Ed Corsi, retired now, was our representative at many of those meetings. So they put the plan together. The plan, I think I might have mentioned this to some of the council just in some email back and forth. The plan is more of an encyclopedia of individual events. It's somewhat helpful in terms of providing some direction in terms of who's responsible for what. For the most part, this binder says that the county is largely responsible for many emergency management situations in Montgomery County. Some municipalities have some responsibilities which are outlined in a few places. The plan, as I said before, the plan has already been approved by Montgomery County, but they have asked for each municipality to also have their city councils approve the plan such that cities can be eligible for FEMA mitigation grant funds in the future because FEMA has also approved the plan. In reviewing the plan, there were just a few what I would call minor areas in which either the plan sort of incorrectly actually states what is possible for the city and/or provides just sort of a direction that probably just needs a little bit of clarification. And so we've outlined those three areas in the cover memo, and I'll just quickly go through them. First one is on page 25 of Chapter 1. It says that Tacoma Park issues building permits. Tacoma Park does not issue building permits. That authority rests with Montgomery County, so we'd like to make that change. On page 160, it discusses Tacoma Park in terms of some of the shelter for severe winter weather. We've talked a little bit about this. For immediate issues, Tacoma Park, many of our facilities can be used as a shelter for some immediate challenges. But long term, we don't have some of the other long-term facilities to be able to house people appropriately. And so we just wanted to make that clarification a little bit on page 160, and then on page 163 for severe heat, also just making clarification on what we are able to do and not able to do. And discussing some of these potential changes with the county and with the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, they are not accepting any changes right now until they update the plan the next time. And if the previous iteration is any indication, it's probably going to be a few years before they do that. So what we've advised them is that, subject to us trying to make sure that these changes are made in the subsequent update to the plan, that we can approve it such that we can still remain eligible for FEMA mitigation grant funds. One of the great things about us going through this, while it doesn't seem that a mitigation plan is any fun to go through, has been that we have recently hired our new emergency preparedness person, Ron Hardy, who is actually here. Ron, I wonder if you could just come up and just say just a few words just about your background a little bit, some of the things you've been involved with as it relates to emergency management.
All right. Well, my name is Ron Hardy. I'm a resident of Montgomery County, retired from the police department from Montgomery County after 32 years of service. Part of my last 7 years of the department was involved in some of our homeland security issues and training and drills with Montgomery County, and putting on some drills for some other agencies, one being in Preston County, West Virginia. I have family that goes back to Tacoma Park all the way back to the 1920s when my grandparents settled here. My father grew up here. My brother currently owns a house on Park Avenue where he grew up. So I do have ties going way back to Tacoma Park. I do have a background in some emergency management. I've done some training. Everything that they do up at EOC I've done before. I've gotten updated and current with the EOC and continuing training. And I've looked at the emergency operations plan, the COOP plan. I have some time set aside this week to start meeting with the department heads so that I can update those plans and get them up to current standards.
Thank you, Ron. So
we're glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to meet you.
So one of the things that, as Ron mentioned, that he's sort of working on, and is one of the items that I think once we sort of get some more definition around some of our individual Tacoma Park EOC plans, I'd like to bring that back to the council and talk a little bit about some of our emergency management planning. I know that we did I guess the city was involved in a emergency response simulation a few years ago, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and I know that's one of the things that Ron has sort of been percolating to. So I think there may be some more action-oriented events that the city partakes in going forward. But getting back to this, so I'm available to answer any questions that any individuals might have about the plan or about the corrections that we're proposing.
I think it makes sense that we would do whatever we need to do to make sure that we're eligible for FEMA funding upon declaration of certain things. I think it's too bad that it got approved with these things not being accurate, but I like the approach of making sure that the county knows that the next time it's revised that these revisions need to happen, and hopefully we'll see if there's something else that needs to be revised in the meantime and keep them up to date on that so that it's fairly automatic when it happens. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you tell us, for the FEMA grants, what type of things would they cover?
I think it's not just grants, although there are a lot of it is the FEMA reimbursements when there's states of emergency. We get about 75% of eligible costs reimbursed. Extra overtime for police and public works, other kinds of purchases that they have to do in a response situation. I'm not sure, and maybe you have to speak at the mic. And there of course are some grants, but I think the main thing that we're most concerned about is the reimbursements.
Yeah, the mitigation also covers how we rebuild so that these don't happen again, like not building in a floodplain or not building on a hill that's continuous with mudslides every time it rains. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for bringing this to us after how many years? It's been a long time in development. I just had two questions. One is, and you alluded to it a little in your opening presentation, but I was at the emergency center shelter for the victims of the Forest Park apartment fires over on Piney Branch Road this year in August. and they were up at the Long Branch Community Center. And if a major event like that happens here, where would people be sheltered?
Yeah, I mean,
And how's that determined?
I think that, again, some of our facilities can be used for, immediate relief of elements. If you've got, emergency tornado, winter weather, and so forth. Our challenge is many of our facilities don't have shower facilities, which is one of the requirements that they have for long-term shelter care. We don't have significant kitchen facilities to be able to prepare and keep foods fresh during.
So they might use one of the local schools then?
More likely than not, I think most of the high schools are designated as long-term shelters because they have the three things that I think they look for in shelters, which are wide open spaces for cots and so forth, showers, and kitchen-type facilities. And I know Ron has actually been over, I think, to the Long Branch.
Yeah, I did a site visit of our own rec department on New Hampshire and went over and talked to Chris over at Long Branch just to see the differences. And again, they have much more space. They have a lot more restroom areas. They have the showers. They have a larger warming ovens, refrigerators. They have a lot more space for the other departments when they actually came in. They could use the conference room there as their basically base of operations, and they had other rooms available to them where they could set up and do counseling and get other departments in there to bring in staff to meet with the people there. So they had much more space available to meet the needs of the people from that department fire.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Kenner, you mentioned a couple of changes that need to be made to the book. The other one that you didn't mention that is in there is glaring, and that is the dates of adoption by the municipalities, including Tacoma Park, and they're all TBD. So they're not going to put those in? I mean, it's update in 10 years when they do the book.
We will have to inquire to them about putting in those dates. It is unclear today what dates they're going to put into the book.
All right, thank you. Now that I have the microphone, I'll quit.
I think that takes care of any questions on that item. I'll just remind my colleagues that under the revised council meeting format that we're going with, that we're trying to make sure that we bring any items like this to the council as a work session first, rather than there's always the tendency to feel like, oh, well, this is relatively simple. Do we need a work session? We can just bring it forward, explain this as the kind of the lead up to the voting item, but feeling that kind of err on the side of bringing it as a work session item so that the public has a chance to understand what it is that we're considering and what we will be voting on, so that we will have the opportunity, they will have the opportunity to make their comments at the beginning of a council meeting before we vote. So we'll bring this one back. And thank you. And we will now go to our last item, which is an update on legislative items as we start to get back into legislative updates big time with Annapolis going into session.
That's true. The rush is on once more. The 2014 session of the Maryland General Assembly opens on Wednesday at noon, and there have been some pre-filed bills, and there's been some activity at the local level. I did want to just take a few moments to talk about some things that have happened since your last council meeting. There's been the public hearings on some of the local and bi-county proposed bills. We did plan to testify against two bills that involve WSSC and the county tree protection laws. These bills were withdrawn on the night of the public hearing, so I was very pleased about that. It was the right decision. We have testified about the AEDs in police vehicles, that's an unfunded mandate. There's a lot of discussion about what the next stage is on that. It sounds like we're likely not to be affected by the final bill. We'll keep on top of that, but it sounds like it's really geared towards Montgomery County government, Montgomery County Police, and so they may be trying to take a completely different approach and just deal with those. The County Affairs Committee has voted in support of our bill, MC 1814, regarding Class B alcoholic beverage licenses in Tacoma Park. The committee vote will go to the full delegation. There's not been any issues related to that. This is the one that would remove the sunset provision and allow the option to continue to have a Class B restaurant that you could also carry out beer and wine from. We have none currently, but it would allow that option to continue. There was some discussion, and I know that Councilmember Siemens mentioned a future discussion about deer hunting in the city. There is a bill, MC 514, that would reduce the archery hunting safety zone from 150 yards to 50 yards from residents or other buildings in Montgomery County without the specific advance permission of the owner or occupant. A 50-yard distance in Tacoma Park, it precludes most locations without some action. If the council wishes to proceed with taking a position on that, you can let me know, and we can bring that as a resolution for you to vote on. That's kind of up to a discussion. Fine with me if you
interject.
I think in urban areas, 50 yards is probably eliminates most of the places, but not necessarily all. But I think anywhere in an urban area is probably inappropriate for the use of a weapon such as bow and arrow that can travel across property lines. And, so I would encourage us to ask for a exemption from that reduction in distance based on us being an urban area. And it's something that the legislators might want to adopt countywide.
I can imagine us opposing the bill, or potentially even, we could figure out whether it's simpler to just oppose, or whether we could support with amendment and say, it's not universal for the county, and maybe, within, you can't even say within municipalities, because you got some small ones out in the upper county who it might be entirely appropriate, but some definition of
population density or something.
Okay, what I'll do then, provided that gets put on a upcoming agenda, I'll check in with both with a couple of the different folks who might have an opinion about which is an easier option for us, and bring those options to you as part of the resolution.
So that we could come up with a course of action that we prefer in a timely manner, so that we could testify at the at the county delegation.
At the county delegation, yeah, I'll find out.
Thank you.
In terms of other kinds of pre-filed bills that are out there, there's a slew of them, but some that may concern us more than others have to do with trying to reduce stormwater, the stormwater authority that we enjoy and charge a fee for, so that we can do our stormwater protection programs. I think there's going to be several of those being debated throughout the course of the session, and we would be actively involved in opposing that and maintaining our authority, unless there's some other different direction that the council provides. There's also a number of bills, legalization of marijuana. There's a variety of criminal justice items. So we'll come up, we'll be sharing those pieces of information with you. We will be getting, I think tomorrow, a list of the bills that are likely to be of interest to us from our lobbyist, Michelle Douglas. I will share those with you, and I would ask that if there's some that you're particularly interested in, you let me know. If there's something on there that if there's something that's not on there that you've heard about and expressed interest, please let me know so we can make sure that we monitor those. And then we'll be able to respond quickly as the session goes forward. The final item I just wanted to mention is that there has been interest in supporting the co-op being able to have a license to allow them to sell beer and wine in Tacoma Park. We will be having a meeting on Wednesday to kind of determine what the various options are, since there's been different opinions based about what those options might be, to at least get that information straight and share that with you. And then if there is any steps that need to be taken, to share that information with you as well. My guess is that it is going to be, as we propose, something that would have to probably take place during the next legislative session after there's been general discussions with the community. But as I said, we've had a number of different people who've reported hearing different information, so we're going to sit around the same table and get it written down and have some agreement across all the parties and report that back to you. If you've got any questions, please let me know.
I have one question for my colleagues. The first session meeting of the MML Legislative Committee is Wednesday, and today I got my first email with the list of bills that we're going to discuss. Would you find it helpful for me to forward you those emails so that you see what's going to be discussed, so that if there's anything there that catches your eye that you want to provide input on, you can give that to me, or we can talk about it at a council meeting. So that gives kind of another set of ideas besides the ones coming from our lobbyist, kind of the ones that MML identifies as having municipal impact. So I'll forward those. It starts out light. I think there were like 10 bills this week. We're meeting each of the next 4 Wednesdays, and it'll ramp up to where there's like 50 bills in a week.
I did also want to, I neglected to mention the comment that was made during resident comments this evening about the personal property tax exemption for banks. And just to make a note in public that the city has tried to get that exemption removed for several years in a row. I don't think it's being pushed hard this session, but it is something that we are interested in. And I appreciated that was brought up again, that banks have that special exemption from the personal property tax that we'd love to see disappear.
And I'll just add on that one that my recollection of the message that we got back in a prior year when we were pushing that was that exemption was part of a deal that was brokered, I don't know, 20 years ago at least, and that changing that one piece of it could potentially open up all kinds of other parts of that deal. So it's not just a simple piece by itself. That's the message that I took away. I don't know if Councilmember Grimes recalls it the same.
I took away that it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Somebody else have a question? Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I think we've taken care of that item, and that's our last item on the agenda this evening, so we are adjourned.
Love it, love it, love it.
Did you get rid of the mayor? So you get here.